Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us today on a Thursday. Actually, Tuesday. Man, I have my days completely messed up. Tuesday morning, 10 a.m. Central Time. We are delighted to have Art and Francois here from Forest Economic Advisors. And we thought it'd be really helpful, especially for some of our investors. We've been getting a lot of questions lately about what is going on with all these tariffs and how are they affecting some of our construction projects, both in construction and about to break ground. And it's somewhat timely because yesterday we broke ground on our Edison project, which is the tallest mass timber building in the world once complete in spring of 2027. And we just started doing our dock wall repair and our piling, and we'll be doing a formal groundbreaking this summer. But we wanted to have Art and Francois give a little bit of a background and probe into what will happen and what is going to happen in the future with all these different kind of big macro events in the economy, both domestically in the US and internationally, and how they might affect some of our building products, especially our mass timber products. So I want to welcome Francois and Art onto Neutral Webinars, and they have a wonderful presentation. But I want to turn it over to both of these gentlemen and have them give us a little probe into mass timber and forest economics. Thanks for coming on the show, guys.
Thanks, Nate. So I am Art Schmoen, and my role with Forest Economic Advisors is to do a forecast and analysis for mass timber. I also manage a conference that we hold annually. It's an international conference called Mass Timber Plus, which will be in Boston this year, October 28, 30. Hope you can be there. My career basically began. I'm a little embarrassed to say this, but in 1973. So for those of you who are doing the math, that's 52 years ago. And I was at the time selling lumber for Macmillan Bloedel, which at that time was Canada's largest forest products company. And one day I was summoned to the general manager's office, and I was pretty sure at that point I was going to be fired, particularly when he asked me to close the door. But then he pulled this funny looking piece of wood out of a drawer, which was an early precursor to Paralam. It was at that time called Dendrion. It looked like spaghetti wood. And but it later became Paralam, and that was 1973. And it wasn't until 1989 that we actually commercialized Paralam, and with two plants. And so my career in engineered wood products began in 1973, that long ago. I'll roll the tape all the way forward. In the early 90s, there was the formation of what a company called Trust Joyce Macmillan, a joint venture limited partnership between Macmillan Bloedel and Trust Joyce Corporation. And I was given the job of starting up their European operations. And that was 1991 through 1997. And during that period of time was when cross-laminated timber was invented and first used commercially in Europe. So I was able to see some of the early applications of that product in Europe. Roll the tape forward again to 2009. I joined Forest Economic Advisors 1 month after the company was founded. And at that time, we had 4 companies subscribing to our forecast services. Today, we have over 350 companies subscribing to our forecast services across the U.S. and also in Europe and in Asia. And so with that, I'll turn it over to Francois.
Thank you. I was barely starting my life when Art started his career. And I graduated in forest management. I've done a master's in forest economics, at the end of which discovered how I was passionate with the actual marketing of forest products. Worked as a researcher in that field, completed my PhD in forest products marketing at UBC some years ago, I would say. And then I joined FEA 8 years ago, where I'm responsible for construction market intelligence. So we do track wood markets in new segments such as multifamily and non-res construction. We do quite much specific research into mass timber. I would call these anywhere from business plans to financial analysis to business opportunities. So we do a lot of support from supply all the way down to market and financials in terms of mass timber market developments. And I'm also responsible for the forecast service at FEA for LVL and I-joists.
So with that, thanks, Francois. We can actually, I think we can jump into our a brief presentation, and we'll use this presentation as a springboard to get into the topics that I know Nate wants us to address with you today. Okay, so basically, I thought it would be interesting to our audience just to have a quick look at mass timber globally, and this is a look at where the plants are today. There are 109 CLT plants in total globally. And I would turn your attention to Europe with 75 of those plants. Europe has 75 plants. North America, only 10 CLT plants. South America actually, surprisingly, has 6. So South America is really coming along strong. If we take a look at Europe, we zero in on Europe, 75 plants, over 200 glulam plants in Europe. The CLT capacity, this is nominal press capacity I'm speaking of, is 2.5 million cubic meters annually on 2 shifts. And that is 65% of global capacity. The annual consumption we estimate at about 1.63 million cubic meters. So it's just about 10 times the annual consumption in North America. So there's lots of excess capacity at present. If you look at that consumption versus even the nominal press capacity, this slide may surprise folks, but this is how it looks. Basically, when you look at the global consumption of CLT, you can see that Europe dominates, perhaps even more than you thought. But Europe is way out in front in terms of actual consumption. And this is actually it says 2023, but this has actually been updated to 2024. So this is very current. So 86% of global consumption. When you break down Europe, what you find out is that actually, there's really not a lot going on in Europe except for Austria and Germany. That's really where the bulk of it is. Austria and Germany account for 60% of European consumption, 53% of global consumption. Austria alone, 27% of global consumption, and that's with a population of only 9 million. Put that into context, the per capita consumption of CLT in Austria is more than 100 times that of North America today, which shows you how much potential, unrealized potential there is in North America. This is just a look at where all of the capacity in North America is. This is mass timber panel plants. So this includes not just CLT, but it includes NLT, DLT, and also GLT panels. And of course, it includes the glulam capacity as well. In red, you see announced expansions. Some of these will be realized. A few of them may not be realized. But we're just showing what has at least been announced, so you can have a look at that. This is a look at our forecast, or history forecasts of both nominal and effective capacity. Let me explain the difference. In green, the green columns you see are nominal press capacity, and those are the numbers you typically see published in magazines and annual reports and so on. When they talk about capacity, they're usually talking 2-shift capacity, but it's nominal. And what that means that everything is to perfection. It means that the billets essentially occupy the full press area, which almost never happens. And it would mean that they have adequate CNC capacity to realize the full nominal press capacity, which almost never happens. And then, of course, you have other constraints like 3D modeling and so on. So basically, what we try to do is drill down to what we call effective capacity, which is, we believe, a more realistic capacity number. And it's about 65%, we believe, of nominal press capacity. Now, that number will vary from manufacturer to manufacturer. And also, that number is not going to be stable over time. We believe that number will rise over time, that the effective capacity will come up closer to nominal press capacity as manufacturers are doing more standardization with respect to their designs. And as they become more experienced, we believe that we're going to see that number come up.
If I can just touch on that, Art, for 1 second. One thing that we're trying to do with our low-rise projects is maximize the nominal press capacity, because if you look at this chart, as Art said, there's a 65% decrease in efficiency when you look at nominal versus effective. And a lot of that is because of these designers putting all these crazy things in buildings, not to joust at designers at all. But what we're trying to do with our low-rise projects is create really standardized panels that the manufacturers love, because they want to maximize capacity. They want to have basically this nominal press capacity be maxed out, because that would mean their plant is highly, highly efficient. And so they have these panels that they basically just are the most efficient panels that you could press. And that's what we're buying for our low-rise projects. And that's what we're designing to. And we're seeing a really great efficiency and cost by doing so.
Super. Yeah. And Nate, I would just add to that too, that you correct me if I'm wrong, but I think most developers want to start working with a specific mass timber manufacturer on a project, maybe perhaps 18 months in advance or thereabouts. And one of the reasons for that, for choosing a single manufacturer, is that they can begin to optimize that design to fit the capabilities of that manufacturer's plant. So with respect to grid size, for example, in the building versus the press area, there are ways that you can optimize. And what that does is it improves the yield, and it brings this effective capacity number percentage up, and ultimately minimizes cost to the developer. So, but that 18-month number is important as we go forward and start to talk about tariffs in a few minutes. When we look at these tariffs, of course, they're going to affect the volume of Canadian mass timber that crosses the border, and the volume of Canadian lumber. Some of the North American mass timber manufacturers are buying Canadian lumber now for their mass timber, so it will affect both lumber and mass timber. Lumber, of course, already has duties applied to it, but mass timber at this point in time comes across the border duty-free, tariff-free, until recently, that is. So if you look at mass timber panel capacity, CLT, DLT, NLT, about a third of that capacity is in Canada, about a third of North American capacity. When we look at just CLT, about a quarter of North America's CLT capacity is in Canada. And if we look at glulam, almost half of North America's mass timber ready glulam capacity is in Canada. Now, what I mean by mass timber ready glulam, I'm contrasting that with most of the glulam plants in North America cannot produce mass timber ready glulam. That is to say, they don't have 3D modeling capability. They don't have engineers on staff. They don't have CNC capacity. They're not able to, in other words, deliver glulam direct to a mass timber job site. And that's how we define this. There are only about 12 manufacturers in North America, 12 plants, I should say, in North America that are capable of doing that at the present time. And here's a look at, this is to the best of our knowledge. There may be one or two that we're not aware of that are now in the game, but at the time that we put this together, you can see the in green, highlighted in green, the plants that are capable of manufacturing mass timber ready flueland. The blank area to the right is where we have all the numbers, and we're not going to show you those today. But if you're interested in those, you can certainly contact us. Now, when we look at the future, well, first of all, let's have a look at the past. This is a look at this is floor area of U.S. projects started or completed in millions of square feet. And the reason these columns are so short is to make room for the projects that are currently in design. So what you see in blue here are projects started or completed. So that's what's been done to date in the U.S. And on the right are the projects in design. And you can see that it's really quite an incredible number. So there's 75.3 million square feet of projects currently in design in the U.S. Now, not all of those will be realized. Woodworks estimate at about 50% of those projects will be realized, but still, it's a big number going forward. And this bodes well in terms of the growth of mass timber, at least pre-tariff. The demand was forecast to grow exponentially. We think that there's still going to be a lot of pressure, upward pressure and demand, even with these tariffs. But we believe that we've lowered the growth trajectory. We had it at about 23% per year through 2029. And now we've lowered that to about 18% on average growth per year between now and 2029. And we'll explain why in a minute. Where are these projects in design? Well, this is a look at how they break down in each of the 9 census regions. And you can see it's pretty much spread out. The mass timber is, I'm sure many of you are aware, was primarily a West Coast phenomenon until 3 or 4 years ago. I mean, it was very, very heavy to the west, Washington, Oregon, California, particularly California. And then there was some activity in New England. But things have changed, and have they changed quickly? If we just look at the coasts today, 22% on the Pacific coast, 45% on the East Coast. So there's an eastern wave coming. These projects in design, by the way, are projects that would be expected within let's say a 2 to 5 year time frame. If they're on paper now, that's what we're probably looking at. So there's an eastern wave coming, and it's not just the East Coast, of course, it's the East North Central and East South Central as well. We're going to see a lot more activity in the East. This is a look at imports. This is also important as before we get into a discussion on tariffs. At the present time, there are no tariffs on European mass timber coming into North America, and there are no tariffs on North American lumber going into Europe. So it's tariff-free at the present time. And so on April 2nd, when President Trump introduces, if he introduces his reciprocal tariffs, ideally, or at least in theory, mass timber should not be affected. So we should still see European mass timber coming into the U.S. tariff-free. However, all things are possible, as we know. Nothing is for certain at this point. But we're hopeful that won't be affected. In any event, as you can see in our forecast, we're expecting CLT imports as a percentage of total consumption to be around the 15% of total consumption.
I think, Art, if we can just go back to that slide for 1 second, that's a big win for us, because that was one thing that we're concerned about, because a lot of our timber comes from these manufacturers, Binderholz, KLH, VHOG, Stora Enso. And so if there was a tariff, it would directly affect our construction costs. But hopefully everything goes as planned, and there are only reciprocal tariffs, which would mean that mass timber is still tariff-free. Obviously, we'll find that out for certain on April 2nd, but we shall see. Hopefully, we don't have a surprise here.
Certainly hope so. And we're going to get into in a little while, by the way, Francois is going to dig down into some of the economics of mass timber manufacture in Europe versus North America, and why Europeans are able to compete so effectively in North America on a cost basis as well as quality. This slide, I think, is really important when we look at the effect that this trade policy, this current trade policy of the U.S. is having on Canada and the rest of the world. And basically, this is an uncertainty index. And as the title says, the outlook for U.S. trade policy is highly uncertain. In fact, more uncertain than it may have ever been, actually, at this point in time. And that uncertainty is almost as bad as the reality of the tariffs. In other words, even before the tariffs are imposed, the uncertainty puts the brakes on for many developers. It's going to put the brakes on moving ahead with certainly with major projects, because these tariffs, of course, the tariffs that we're speaking of today are tariffs on mass timber, but of course there are tariffs on everything, all the metals. We just learned just before airtime today that President Trump has doubled the tariff on not just steel and aluminum, but all Canadian metals. So steel and aluminum will be at 50% now, and all other metals will be, I guess, at 25%. But and then they will go to 50 on April the 2nd if he decides to do the blanket tariff again. It's things are changing very rapidly, but that uncertainty alone is enough to cause a developer to say, well, you know what, I think I'm just going to hold off on this major project until we have some closure on this whole issue, until we have certainty, or at least more certainty than we have today. And that alone is going to slow some of this growth in mass timber consumption. And one way that we look at this is data from Woodworks. And what you're looking at here in these green columns is the average. It's basically the average number of days waiting for construction. So the design's complete, and now we're waiting for construction. And this, as you can see, is 2019 through 2024. And you can see over that period of time, this is projects in the U.S., all mass timber projects, reported mass timber projects. And as you can see, that waiting time has been increasing, but it kind of leveled off in 23, 24, and it was starting to come down. In fact, if you look at this on a building occupancy basis, you can see that for multifamily was really one of the building occupancies where you had huge delays. But multifamily is coming down, institutional coming down. I think what we're going to see with the not just the tariffs, but even the threat of tariffs in place, is you're going to see these numbers start to go back up again, until people have reasonable certainty. Francois, I'll turn it over to you at this point.
Thank you, Art. Yes, one of the reasons why Nate came to us and asking for that discussion today was his interest in understanding what makes the European suppliers so different than North Americans in North America. So I'll walk you through a couple of data points, but to Nate's question, there is not one single answer, but maybe I would say a kind of a planet alignment, or a few drivers, if you will, that explain why we see European suppliers in such a good shape in both the US and Canada. So for starters, wood costs. I'll walk you through some of the wood costs on average for 24 in the next couple of minutes. But in Europe, you can buy ready-to-use lamellas to supply any glulam or CLT factory. And typically, this very specific products sells in Europe for less than construction lumber over there. And as we will discover in a couple of minutes, in North America, as we speak, there's only southern yellow pine as a species which can rival with European wood cost. So certainly Europe comes in at a cost advantage. Another driver that I would like to bring your attention to is scale. In North America, the largest panel capacity, which is operated by Mercer, is stated as at about 140,000 meters a year. And anyone else in the trade has a capacity between 25, 30 and 75, 80,000 meters. In Europe, there are 15 plants operating at 100,000 cubic meters or more. So definitely economies of scale are at stake on the European side. And except maybe in North America, the best in class example might be Nordic with a back office with close to 100 designers, engineers, and 3D modelers. Typically, European manufacturers, suppliers are much more staffed in terms of designers. So for instance, Binders has over 90 resources dedicated to design, engineering, and 3D modeling, which improves their capacity to develop projects. Yeah, another key aspect is that if you look at the vertical integration, starting with North America, both Nordic and Kalesnikov operate a sawmill in North America. Smartlam has to some degree a cooperation and ownership piece in a sawmill, but it's not their core business. But only Nordic goes all the way up to timberland management. Move eastward into Europe. Most manufacturers are at least integrated towards sawmilling and to lumber manufacturing, which makes product and process optimization and most often cost optimization also much more possible.
I just want to make a quick point. If you look at this slide, it's really interesting because one of our projects we're using Binderholz on in Madison. And then the large project that I talked about early on in the presentation, Edison, we're using Storenzo. And if you see Storenzo, they show up twice on this chart, one time in Central Europe and another time in Scandinavia. And what's really cool about this is they go all the way from forest all the way through to basically delivering to us and having assembly. And that is just a huge value differential for these manufacturers that are doing that versus the ones here in the US. There's no US manufacturer that has that fully integrated supply chain. And I think, Francois, it's probably a testament to why, maybe you can speak more to this, of why we're seeing lower pricing in Europe is because they actually have control and efficiencies over that full supply chain. Whereas in North America, they're relying on sawmill and timberland from other people. And so they, one, can't control the cost of the sawmill at all times, and two, they can't control the growth of the forest.
Yeah, I would say to your point that it might be cost advantage, but I see it more as edge or insurance against price volatility. If you go back to the crazy pricing environment of the pandemic, then those companies who were integrated had a better availability to secure lumber supplies to their manufacturing facilities at decent cost. Of course, this all comes with an opportunity cost because they also can sell lumber on the open market. But when you have, as Art mentioned, 12, 18, 24 months contracts ahead of you that are signed and committed, then that kind of edging certainly has come as a true advantage when price volatility hit a peak.
And do you think they also have the ability, like I'm just thinking about Edison, we bought that out about 18 months, actually 19 months before we'll need the first shipment of wood. So do they have the ability to actually go into the forest and say, hey, these trees are going to be designated for this project and plan that far out in advance?
Well, I'm not sure that they can go to the degree of specifying which trees will end up in the project, but with traceability, as we now see spreading across the wood industry, they certainly can predict their cost to some degree far in advance, and with such kind of integration.
Interesting.
Yeah. So we do operate a financial model to assess new mass timber investments, and we made a short run of it as of late with wood cost, lumber costs as they are. So for a plant in North America that would buy SPF 2x6 spruce pine fir, if you will, 2x6 to supply a CLT plant producing at what have you, 35, 40,000 cubic meters a year, then wood right now would be 62% of your variable cost. When prices were high as they were during the pandemic, wood costs were well above 70%. And adhesive might actually be lower than that, but we have seen a bump in adhesive cost also with the pandemic. So the take-home lesson with that variable cost breakdown certainly is the sheer importance of wood as part of the cost. One thing that we don't show up very well in that slide, and that is for a purpose, is that Nate, you have alluded to the complexity of some projects in mass timber. And the more projects are complex, the more design content that they require. And design and engineering for mass timber can be a very heavy component of delivered cost as well.
If I could just say one quick thing on those engineering and design costs, 3D modeling, there has been some discussion amongst Canadian producers of separating those costs out, of billing those separately from the actual mass timber, because those costs technically are not tariffable. They're not physical goods. So that's one of the things that they may do in the event of these severe tariffs.
Yeah, I think that's funny you say that, Art, because that is what we had planned on doing if the tariffs go into effect on our wood coming from Europe. But after today, I'm a little bit more optimistic that they maybe won't, which would be great.
Thank you. Yeah, so that was a very desktop experiment. We have converted for today's call 2024 prices. So C24 is construction lumber in Germany. Of course, everyone knows that 2x6, 2x8 is not sold by the cubic meter in North America. So we have done that conversion. So if you look at the first column, you can see that to start with, glulam lamellas, which are ready to be used in a factory, are almost at the same price than spruce pine fir 2x6 in the US. Of course, the recovery on this supply is different, because if you feed a plant with lamellas, you don't lose much. You will lose on finger jointing. There's some losses on quality, but pretty much everything is usable. Plants in North America who consume 2x6, many of them do so. That's the preferred dimension in a mass timber plant. Typically, we factor that you need 22.5 board feet of lumber to produce 1 cubic foot of mass timber. So it can be 21, it can be 23, but on average is 22.5. So basically, if you factor that recovery factor within the supply cost, and then you compare with lamellas, you can see that it's much more efficient on a 2024 basis to supply a plant with ready-made lamellas in Europe than it would be with spruce pine and fir in North America. The price difference, the gap between Southern Pine and SPF last year has widened, and it became wide to a point where using SPF with all the challenges on a processing front that it involves, despite these challenges for Southern Pine, then we can see that this species has a future in competing with European supplies. I can provide you with a true or accurate number, but right now the proportion of the North American capacity running on Southern Yellow Pine still is small, but it certainly is growing. So Nate, to your question, while North America is not overly competitive right now, we can think, looking at this kind of number, that it will improve over time.
Francois, if I can just ask a question on this, the column that you have titled as 2024, where it says 351 for C24 and then 283 for SPF. What's the difference between that price and then the column on the right, cost input to CLT?
Okay, super simple is that if you use lamellas, you can almost glue them together and have a one-on-one input. Of course, it's not one-on-one, so you lose approximately 10 to 15%. So we add that recovery of 10% in that case to get to what it costs you to produce 1 meter. But for SPF, we assign 22.5 board feet of lumber that you supply at $283 to produce 1 cubic foot that then we convert in cubic meters. So the right column is the amount of lumber used at which price for a cubic meter of CLT produced.
Okay, interesting. So do you think that in the next 5 to 10 years, the Great Lakes and the Southern Yellow Pine regions that produce those woods will be cost competitive with Germany C24?
Yeah, I will say that the analysis would be far better off with longitudinal analysis, because the gap between SPF and SYP is not always that wide. I don't see SPF becoming, I don't see that gap closing down the road. It might reduce, but SPF is bound to be more expensive than Southern Yellow Pine over the next decade at least, just because the timber supply in Southern Yellow Pine certainly is the only one growing in North America, while the SPF basket is not. Having said that, I think that you might be able to see SPF lower than that, and it's part of the reason why also we are going to see more investment driven in the South going forward.
Yeah,
I would just add to that the situation in Europe, as we look to the future, is that that spruce C24 is not going to be as available in the future, in the medium to longer term future in Europe, as it is today, because of the beetle kill and windstorm damage that was done in Central Europe. That's going to be felt 5, 6, 7 years from now, and we're going to see prices for spruce going up. It's not going to be as available, and prices will go up. And I know the European manufacturers are very concerned about that. I just met with one a few months ago, a major producer in Europe, and this is going to be an issue for them. And it may have been one of the reasons why Binderholz bought 2 lumber mills in the South. They may, one reason they're given was, well, they just want to make CLT in North America, but another possibility is that it's another raw material source for their existing CLT capacity.
Yeah, no, that would make sense. I think one thing I've been really pushing, especially because we have offices in San Francisco and Wisconsin, and both Wisconsin and California are big wood states. Actually, Wisconsin has been historically a very significant wood state. economically speaking, for a long time, but it's been mostly focused on paper. And the wood industry has seen a significant degradation over the last 20, 25 years due to paper not really obviously growing that much due to this thing called the computer. And one thing that I've been advocating for, and it spoke with some city and state officials, was getting more CLT manufacturers and sawmills in Wisconsin. Because the Great Lakes has a lot of SPF, and we could totally use it to build basically the same panels we're building in Austria right here in our backyard. And it's, to me, a little bit stupid that we're not doing that. And it's really because we don't have the infrastructure or the vertical integration. And so I think that's something that we need to look into and maybe spend more time on as an industry. But we do have a few questions. The first one is from Steve, and I think it's for you, Art. Why is the wait time so much longer for multifamily as opposed to commercial or institutional? In that chart you showed, that was the wait time of construction from having 100% construction documents to the time you start construction.
Yeah, that's a good question. I think in general, multifamily is more sensitive to interest rates. Yeah, so we've been talking about tariffs, but it's not just tariffs. This delay time is also affected by interest rates. And one of the things that we're expecting for, even if these tariffs are short-lived, we still, on our forecast, we're not forecasting any significant reduction in interest rates until the end of the year, or perhaps the first quarter of 26. And so that's not good news for, let's say, for all developers, but I think particularly in the multifamily sector, they may be even more sensitive to that. Francois, do you have anything to add to that, or?
No, I think that the interest rates have been certainly postponing, and not only for mass timber, but for multifamily projects overall, except for a quick increase in starts in multifamily construction in third quarter last year. The entire 2024 has been plagued with the uncertainty about upcoming rates in the multifamily sector.
Yeah, I would also add, just from anecdotal experience, you typically get done with your design and you'll have, I would say, probably between 2.5 to 4 months of bidding before you want to start construction, because you want to get all your contracts bought out with the construction folks and subcontractors. So I think that wait time is probably, regardless of interest rates, regardless of tariffs, whatever is going on, you probably have 90 to 120 days regardless. The increase, I think, is due to exactly what you guys hit on, and also just the wait times in things like transformers, other big kind of critical path items. What we saw, especially right during the midst of COVID, was we actually stalled out one of our projects and didn't start because we wanted to make sure we had our transformer in time, because we didn't want to build half the building and then try to get temp power and not have a temporary transformer for the electricians to be able to do that, because that would basically just put us all on pause. And so we deliberately delayed the building. And I've seen a few other colleagues do this as well, due to this specific issue, because they wanted to wait to make sure they had that transformer on order. And I think during COVID, there were so many kind of unique situations like that. That's part of the reason why we saw that huge spike in your chart, Art, is that people were kind of waiting and making sure they had material on time to be able to stick with their critical path and not delay during construction, because it's better to delay an empty site than a site half built.
Better answer than mine.
No, not at all. Not at all. Your answer was spot on. We have another one. What % of design is done by CLT companies versus developers, hired architects, etc.? What exactly is the design done by the CLT provider?
Well, I that's probably another question you can answer me better than
sure.
I can. You've just been through this. Go ahead.
We typically will go through about around, I would say, SD. Sometimes we go into 50% DD, but we usually get at least schematic design done. So basically, that's our full massing. That's some sort of skin system in very kind of preliminary modeling. It's a quick panel layout, nothing crazy. It's major penetrations, like our elevators, some of our large HVAC systems. And then with that set, we go out and we bid. The reason we do that is because we want enough basically data to give to these manufacturers to go through a competitive bid process. So we'll usually go to, the big ones, Sorenzo, Binderholz, VHAG, the few that we've been talking about today, KLH. And then in America, we'll go to SmartLam, Mercer, Klenskopf, Nordic, Element 5, a few others, and then bid this set out. And from there, we go into a design build contract. And that's exactly what Francois was talking about. Is I think a lot of people are looking into this kind of loophole, but breaking out the design build into design as a one contract exclusive, and then build as a separate contract exclusive. And then the tariff is only charged on the build, because the tariff is charged at port of entry based on the declared value. And so you don't need to declare design as the value, because it's services rendered in a different country. So that's typically the process. Sometimes I would say there's very unique cases where people will go all the way through design and get to 100% construction drawings. I would say who's ever doing that is unwise, because you really need the tool, back to Art's point, to a specific press and specific manufacturing constraints. So it's most wise to just go and get bidding done at around SD, and then go into a design build contract.
Other thing I just bring up quickly too, another mitigating factor for the Canadian side is the value of the Canadian dollar, which will, if these tariffs are actually imposed, that value is going to dive. And we're expecting, actually, we would expect, if for even at 25%, we would expect the Canadian dollar to get down to about 60 cents, roughly. And so, that takes a big chunk of the tariff away in terms of that value. That's a rather large percentage. So that, combined with what Nate was just talking about with engineering and design services, you start to see how things may become doable again, although it won't be a pretty picture for Canada, of course, but the value of the dollar will be a factor as well, for sure.
Okay, we have another question. Does Neutral have any vertical integration within the supply chain of CLT, or is this all sourced out bid? We currently do not, but this is something we're looking into. Currently, our vertical integration is all on the design, construction, engineering, development side of the house. We haven't attacked the forest side of the house per se, but this is something that we're actively exploring. We actually this year are applying for a grant with USDA to look at actually manufacturing CLT panels in Wisconsin. We have a forest up north that we're going to be partnering with, and then we have a small manufacturing facility that we're going to be utilizing from our friends down south. And so we're going to see if we can pull it off. It might be something that we want to do in the future. We do have Neutral Workshop, which is our in-house carpentry division, where we build a lot of craftsman-oriented carpentry items like slat walls and slat ceilings and lots of nice casework and things like that. So we're not foreign to working with wood, but the CapEx on building a CLT manufacturer is not cheap. And we're trying to not go in the way of Katerra, who spent $150 million on a CLT manufacturing facility with really out any business and then went bankrupt. So we're liking to take these kind of iteratives approach to these new ideas and new markets. And hopefully in the next 5 to 10 years, we'll do something with it, but not in the near horizon.
The other thing, and I just point out too, there's another maneuver that you could see coming from Canada as I think about these things. And that is that you could see Canadian producers shipping blanks across the border to secondary fabricators in the U.S., which is another way of reducing value.
That's something actually, Art, we looked into. And just so everyone knows what a blank is, that's what I was talking about early on with what we're designing for our low-rise projects, which is literally they make the most efficient panel based on their press size, and they just run these through their mill really, really quickly. Any manufacturer will do it for you. It's basically like if you ever go to Menards or Home Depot or Lowe's and you buy a standard plywood sheet, it's very akin to that. And so that's what we're using for our low-rise projects. Right now, we're having Binderholz do the CNCing, but we have looked at having them just ship the blanks here, and then we do all the kind of custom fabrication. So that's one thing we're looking into about kind of a baby step into CLT manufacturing. Okay, next one we have from Steve. What % of total delivered cost of CLT right now is transport cost from Europe? How much is to be saved in producing more locally just on transport? Is that in material? That's probably for Francois.
Well, I will say that we don't have clarity on the actual delivery proportion of cost from materials coming from Europe. But if you include delivery, European supplies certainly come right now at least at 20% discount and sometimes more than that, including shipping. So to your point, economies will come when supply costs in Europe will either increase or if we have the ability to improve the way we use the supply in North America. And this might be a topic for another discussion, but the CLT manufacturing process is not overly efficient by using dimension lumber, and new investments, new investors are looking at ways to optimize the recovery factor. So by that, I mean using less material input or lumber to produce the same amount of mass timber. So going forward, I can see that gap shortening, but for now, even with delivery cost, we're still far from it.
Yeah, I mean, I think delivery, Nate, and you probably have a very good feel for this too, because you're bringing material in from Stora. But the freight costs are not prohibitive from Europe at all. They're quite the freight costs can be quite cheap actually from Europe. And my understanding is that it's probably cheaper to ship from Europe to the East Coast of the U.S. than from the West Coast of North America to the East Coast.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
Yeah. For the main reason that our rail system sucks in the US, which can be a topic for another time. Maybe we should do a full transportation mobility webinar. But we just anecdotally, we just bid out not too long ago a project here, and it was a 32% increase in wood supply if we went North American, and that include shipping from Europe. And so the shipping was somewhat minimal in the total cost because it was such a big gap. So we're not really close enough to really analyze shipping and say, oh, shipping's more from Europe versus North America because the gap on the underlying material is so big. Last question in our last 2 minutes, because I just want to get to it, is given the months of time, maybe full years between beginning of design and final design acquisition of material, how might you manage that partnership to see the full benefit of selecting a supplier early on? And I think this is pertaining Art to specifically selecting an early manufacturer, trying to figure out kind of the economics around if that manufacturer is going to be around. How do you know that they are going to be solvents? How do you know the wood's going to be there? Because you are kind of locking yourself into that manufacturer for the next, could be 24 months.
Right. And I think, back to the tariff issue, I think, obviously a developer today would probably not be selecting, as we sit here today, selecting a Canadian mill as a source, simply because of the uncertainties with respect to what these tariffs are going to do, and indeed whether all of the Canadian manufacturers are even going to survive if these tariffs are imposed and if they're kept in place. We hope that isn't the case, and I know that in Canada they're making preparations they're trying to scale up mass timber adoption in Canada even faster as a result of these tariffs. There are plans afoot to do that, which will be very interesting to see. But yeah, no, I mean, I think in sort of more normal times, and even in times now, I guess in the U.S., if I had a major project, I would be contacting the U.S. suppliers and European suppliers even sooner to begin discussing my project with them and choosing. I guess I would want to be choosing the manufacturer. Well, first of all, if you go back to the entire process here, for many developers, of course, it's still a game of, do we go steel and concrete or do we go mass timber? And I think the key here is that the mass timber manufacturer needs to be through that door when the design process begins. Would you agree, Nate, that it's absolutely critical? In other words, that the building is designed with mass timber in mind from the outset.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Switching becomes not very economical, typically, switching from steel or concrete design to a mass timber design. But if it's mass timber from the beginning, you obviously want to select a mass timber producer who you think it has legs. It's going to be around in 2 years or 3 years. And yeah, there are some risks there. But I'm not going to get into specific names, but I think who those producers are likely to be. And those are the people you want to, and you want to be getting in the door early also, because there's also these companies have other major projects that will be under consideration, and you want to be sure that you're in the door soon enough so that you can assure yourself of delivery on time for your specific project. One thing I just add quickly that I didn't mention earlier is that we continue to believe that we need a big surge in capacity in the U.S., perhaps even more now with the tariffs coming along. But the reason I say that is because there are some mega companies that are making strategic decisions right now that could very much impact capacity. And what I'm referring to here are Google, Amazon, and Microsoft, who are all looking at data centers. And you may be aware, I don't know if you're aware of this, Nate, or whether the viewers are, but Microsoft is in the process now of building 2 data centers in Virginia that are mass timber, that are actually hybrid structures with steel, I should say, beams and columns, and CLT decks. And Amazon, we know, have been examining the possibility of moving. The reason that they're so keen on doing this is because these companies have very aggressive carbon mitigation targets, 2030, 2040, 2050. And these targets were set before the data center business took off. And now that they need more data centers, they're having to do much more construction. And of course, if they're doing that construction in steel and concrete, it makes it more difficult for them to achieve these targets. So they're looking back at mass timber again as a potential solution to some of this problem moving forward. But there's nowhere near the capacity that we would need if one of these companies wanted to make a strategic decision, such as we're going to build our data centers, for example, with hybrid structures from now on. They're just, the capacity isn't there. So this is something that we think could have an impact too on investors going forward.
Yeah. One anecdote I would add to that, Art, is we unfortunately selected the wrong manufacturer, which was initially Katera, for our first project that we ever did. And during the mix of design, we were at the end of design development going into construction documents. I get a letter saying, unfortunately, Katera is going bankrupt in a week, and you're going to have to find a new supplier. And we had everything tied to him. We had the architect, the engineer, the mass timber manufacturer, everything was around this one company. And so I said, okay, well, that's a terrible day, very bad day. And the next day I started calling a bunch of people and I was like, where can I find timber for this deal? So then I went and I found this company called Structure Lamb, which Art and Francois, you guys probably know. It's now a company that's no longer around. And I said, hey, could you guys provide mass timber? And they said, oh yeah, no problem. And so I signed a contract with them and got to the end of construction documents. So about 8 months later, and I get another letter saying, we're unfortunately going to be restructuring and we won't be able to supply your material. And I was like, oh my goodness, this is terrible. And my whole initiative was that we were trying to source North American lumber. I didn't want to go to the Europeans. And so I finally said, okay, fine. I'm going to go to the Europeans and I'm going to go to one of these old companies that have been around for a long time, have forests, and they can hopefully actually deliver on their promise that they tell me. And so I went to KLH, and KLH did deliver. They delivered the project. It all went really well. Everything was on time, on budget, and they did a fantastic job. And since then, we've gone to Europe for all of our sourcing because you have all these companies in Europe like KLH, like Stora Enso, like Binderholz that have been around. I mean, Stora Enso is the oldest European company. I think it's 300 years old, so it's older than the United States. And so
Actually, make that 700.
700 years old. Wow. So my suggestion for whoever asked that question is go to a well-established, entrenched mass timber manufacturer to do your first job, and then maybe on your future jobs try something a little bit crazy and go to someone new. But for your first one, go to someone that's well established.
That's interesting. So you had the double whammy, essentially, with respect to flying. Oh, so that's terrible.
Yeah, same project too. Well, I know we're up on time here, Art and Francois, but I really appreciate you both coming on and educating us about mass timber and tariffs and economics here. Appreciate everyone joining us on this Tuesday morning. And if you want to rewatch the webinar, or if you want to contact Francois or Art, we'll have that on our website. We'll have their LinkedIn's on our website, so you can reach out to them on LinkedIn or just rewatch the video on our website. But thank you everyone for joining the webinar today, and we'll see you in the next one next month.